This commemorative was dedicated actually in June of 1988. But prior to that, there was a lot of thought, planning, and a lot of creative ideas had to be made. And this morning, what I have here is I have three individuals that are really going to give you a background on how this park was created and thought of. And in our audience today, too, we have a acclaimed author, Dr. Ann Charters, who put together a lot of our Kerouac's letters. So let me just open up with a quick quote out of one of Jack Kerouac's books. It's from Visions of Gerard. And see if you can figure out what he's talking about. They go instead around by Kirk Street and down a railroad switch alley for the mills, across a spectral inline bridge street where stands the great warehouse of eternity, and into a little alley that runs between it in the stage door side entrance of B.F. Keith's Theater. What's that building of eternity?
Right here. Right here.
You got it, right here. Well, enough of my talking. My first guest speaker is going to be Richard Scott, and he can tell you a lot about this land right here and how it came about. And Richard was one of our original members of Lowell Celebrates Kerouac, another reason why we're here today. Okay, Richard, go ahead.
Good morning. From Maggie Cassidy, published in 1959 by Jack Kerouac. It was New Year's Eve, 1939. It was snowing in the north. The fellows were staggering down the snowy road arm in arm, supporting a central figure who all alone was singing in a cracked, sad, broken voice what he had heard the cowboys sing in Gates Theater Friday afternoon. Jack of diamonds, you'll be my downfall. But not knowing the downfall part of it, just the Jack O where it broke and yodeled in a western twang, this is G.J. Rogopoulos singing. His head hung low like a drunk's as they dragged his shoes through the snow, arms limp and hips hanging out like an idiot's in a tremendous display of didn't care attitude that had all the others struggling, slipping in the snow to hold them up. But from his broken doll neck came the plaintive notes, Jack of diamonds, as the great thick snowflakes dropped straight on our heads. It was New Year, the New Year 1939, before the war, or before anyone knew the intention of the world toward America. Those were the words I had the privilege of reading right here in this park on a sunny day on Saturday, June 25th, 1988, when this marvelous monument was dedicated. Congressional Representative Chet Atkins was the one who read Follow the Singer. Well, good morning, everyone here today. What better way to start an early Saturday morning with some bad country music? Welcome to Lowell. Some might ask when the plans for this commemorative began. There are many theories on this topic. My personal theory is that the quest to create a monument to literature, albeit Lowell literature, was conceived on March 12, 1922, when John Louis Debris Kerouac was born. His life was to be dedicated to and oftentimes governed by the austere Kerouac family motto, love, work, suffer. That's sort of a goth version of Eat, Pray, Love. Perhaps it was also a send-up to Buddha's first noble truth, that existence is suffering. But somehow Jack Kerouac turned this painful, cathartic core belief into a celebration of life unlike the world had ever known. In 1987, a strange mystical convergence somehow brought together a misfit group of off-center individuals to form a committee dedicated to the planning of an event surrounding the dedication of the Jack Kerouac commemorative Eastern Canal Park. Many of you have probably never heard the name Eastern Canal Park, but yes, the park was in the process of design and construction before the commemorative was planned. The Heritage State Park in Lowell, when the state had some money there, and the city of Lowell were in partnership to create a front yard for the adaptive reuse condos and apartments right over there, the Massachusetts Mills, which one was the first one built in the city. The state had undertaken this plan as a major part of redevelopment, and it involved tearing down that great gray warehouse of eternity that stood on this spot. And it was a dilapidated mill. It was a dilapidated building, and it was just sort of an eyesore here Massachusetts Mills wanted to take it down and was part of the project. So the saga began. The public art program was in full swing at the time, and finally the stars aligned, and Eastern Canal Park was thought to be the proper setting for the soon-to-be constructed Kerouac Commemorative. Let the games begin. Each member of our committee was extremely and personally protective of the legacy and legend of Jack Kerouac. This became obvious early on in our lively and animated discussions. That's the most diplomatic way I could put it. One of the first tasks we had to accomplish was to give a name to our upcoming extravaganza. We went round the world and back on that one. Finally, the brilliant and indomitable Roger Burnell simply stated that Kerouac celebrated Lowell with his words. There was a thought-fraught silence, and then Lowell Celebrates Kerouac appeared in the sky like Gerard's cart to heaven. The most daunting word to place in any event, and I've been involved in a lot of events in the beginning, is the word annual. Are we crazy enough to want to do this every year, like the Folk Festival, Peter? And can we convince enough other people to get on our bus and go further than we had ever thought possible? There was a resounding yes from everyone at the table. Now the devil was in the details. The event then was split into two intricate and equally important parts. First was the dedication of the commemorative itself to take place on Saturday. Second were all the peripheral events set to occur between Thursday and Sunday. It started as Friday, Saturday, then went Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then somebody said, oh, we can do this on Thursday. So it just kept growing. Remember, this was June, because no one thought it was a good idea to wait till October and let the monument sit dormant, unacknowledged after its completion for 6 months. Jack Kerouac himself was christened within 7 days of his birth. Easiest decision made. I knew from my past experience that the dedication would have some political overtones simply because of the funding sources involved, as well as some diplomatic ones involving Jack's family by longevity and marriage, the Sampuses. We wanted to make the soiree in the park simple, appropriate, and respectful, and with the cast of characters involved, that was going to be quite a challenge. A number of speakers were chosen. It was consensus that most of us would read the passages from Jack's books as Ben Waitana had carved them into the polished granite stones. I read the segment from Maggie Cassidy. It was the only one with the singing part, so that was pretty cool. American Idol wasn't around at the time. And Brian Foy got to see the fruits of his labor as he raised his hand when he stood at the podium and said, we did it. Brian will be speaking up here also, and he'll be presenting a great program later about all the yeoman's work that he and his group did, detailing the long journey to create this wonderful work of art. All of us thought it fitting that we leave the keynote spotlight moment of the dedication to Stella Sampras Kerouac. The morning of the event came. The weather cooperated. We did not have to worry about rain, snow, sleet, or hail. You never know what to expect in New England. The city provided the stage electricity. The state provided the sound equipment. NPS provided the sound technician and tent over the stage. A local singer-songwriter, Bob Martin, provided the pre-gala musical entertainment as the crowd gathered and began to mingle. There was a bit of a cat and mouse game being played there as Stella and the Sampras contingent arrived and saw Jan Kerouac, Edie Parker, Henry Crew, Allen Ginsberg, and Jerry Nicosia. These folks were not Stella's favorites. But her concern was not her personal like or dislike. Her worry was that they would take the limelight away from the true hero of the day, her husband, Jack Kerouac. On a personal note, I had the privilege of inviting Jan Kerouac to the event. She was living out west at the time. I spoke to her on the phone, and we had an immediate affinity for one another. I also found out that our birthdays are only 2 days apart. While she was here, she came to a dinner party at my mother's house. And who was there? Brad Parker, Jerry Nicosia, Robin Moore, Ann Charters. And they thoroughly enjoyed the family atmosphere and enjoyed even more, like everyone else, my mother's incredible apple pie. She was able to read from her dad's works at a panel discussion held at Liberty Hall that night, despite her failing eyesight. She has since passed away, but she always said that being in Lowell for the dedication and the other events was an experience she'd never forget. So picture this. Edie Parker, Jack's first wife, was there. Jan Kerouac, Jack's daughter from his second wife, Joan Haverty, is there. Like living chess pieces out of Alice in Wonderland, they moved about the commemorative in stealth-like hide-and-seek mode. Allen Ginsberg, in true Allen fashion, tried a few times to sneak up on the stage like a bad adolescent trying to be noticed. It was all part of what I still refer to as the mystical, fanciful urban street theater that is Lowell. It was fitting that some kind of drama play itself out at the event on this hallowed ground, commemorating one of the most controversial writers of all time. Finally, the speakers and dignitaries gathered on the dais and one by one took the podium to read the words as they appeared on the commemorative. Reverend Lionel Willett gave the invocation, Paul Saunders sat next to Stella, and a picture of Jack graced the stage. The final speaker was Stella, whose raw emotion cut through the crowd like a knife. She knew it had been a hard-fought battle to get this fitting and proper monument built, celebrating the works of her husband, as his work celebrated the city he loved so dearly. It was the only place he ever truly called home. Stella spoke so proudly that day of being the wife of a great writer. Her words, her sincerity, her demeanor, her profound honesty finally hushed the critics and naysayers who had tried to derail this project so many times. She concluded so eloquently by loudly professing that my husband Jack Kerouac's words flow through this monument like the Merrimack River flows throughout his beloved city of Lowell. The sun shone down on us, the water in Eastern Canal sparkled like never before, and with each syllable uttered, Jack's spirit became more alive and more visible to all who attended. This was his day, the one he had hoped for deep in the catacombs of his soul. In his latter days, he was his usual private, brooding self, but an enigma. Not only not wanting to be asked the meaning of life, but also not wanting not to be recognized for the influential and prolific author he was. He had said earlier in life that if a statue of him was to be created like that of Balzac, he would pose naked for it. Well, he didn't have the opportunity to do that, but he did get to bear his heart, mind, and most intimate thoughts through his magnificent words, literally etched in stone for all to read, absorb, and imbibe. There's a book published in 2007 by Edie Frankie Parker entitled You'll Be Okay. Near the end of the book, Edie describes her version of the events of that day in June 1988. Before long, the official celebrants began to fill the dais. Alan was there, as well as Stella Samphus, Kerouac, Jack's widow, along with all the local and state politicians who until that moment had disavowed Jack's ties to Lowell. They thought of him as a drunkard, and the town might be better off if they forgot about him entirely. The ceremony was all very dignified and stiff, and throughout it, most of the crowd and media attention was focused on Henry and Edie. Now you got to remember, Edie's the one writing this book, who ignored the official speeches. When it was all over, the crowds began to disperse. I overheard someone telling Ferlinghetti about a party being thrown at one of the hotels for the guests. I went over to Edie and told her that we should go, and said, well, I don't know, maybe nobody wants us to go, we didn't get invited. Henry wheeled his way over after giving an interview to the reporter from the Lowell Sun newspaper. We told him what was going on and asked what he thought we should do. Just then, out of nowhere, a woman approached, extending her hand and smiling. She was having a few people over to her house and asked if we would come there for beer and pizza. Henry didn't hesitate. Beer and pizza? We'd love to. The one who invited Henry Crew and Edie and a bunch of others was Bob Martin and his wife Anne Marie, who lived over in Centerville at the time. So he actually knew Jack from, he lived on Stephen Street, and Jack had lived there later on in his life. I first heard about Jack Kerouac from my dad, who knew him through his football days at Lowell High. My father, the quintessential Lowell guy, gave me a copy of On the Road, which I read when I was 12, and was quite intrigued by the style, speed, and flow of the prose. I was hooked at that point. I was lucky enough to be supervised with the Heritage State Park in Lowell during an incredibly creative time. I still consider my role in the dedication of the Commemorative and the creation of Lowell Celebrates Kerouac as the most humbling and successful moment of my 32 career with the Massachusetts State Parks. Events of this nature are not about the planners or the politicians. They are the sole property of those to whom they are dedicated. It is the legacy of individuals like Jack Kerouac kept alive that we can all share in, revel in, due to the generosity of their creative endeavors. Since this year is the 60th anniversary of the publication of Dharma Bums, I'd like to conclude my remarks with one of my favorite passages. In fact, it was when I was doing the walking tours, I would always finish by reading it right here. Pay close attention to the last lines of this. It's a really good philosophy of life right at the end. Then would come wild, lyrical, drizzling rain from the south in the wind. And I'd say, taste the rain, why kneel? And I'd say, time for hot coffee and cigarette, boys, addressing the imaginary bhikkhus. The moon was full and huge, and with it came the aurora borealis over Mount Hosamine. Look at the void, it is even stiller, Han San had said in Jaffe's translation. And in fact, I was so still, all I had to do was shift my crossed legs in the alpine grass, and I could hear the hoofs of deers running away somewhere. Standing on my head before bedtime on the rock roof of the moonlight, I could indeed see that the earth was truly upside down, and man a weird, vain beetle full of strange ideas, walking around upside down and boasting. And all I could realize that man remembered why this dream of plants and planets and Plantagenets was built out of primordial essence. Sometimes I'd get mad because things didn't work out well. I'd spoil a flapjack, or slip in a snowfield while getting water, or one of my times my shovel went sailing down into the gorge. I'd be so mad I'd want to bite the mountaintops, and would come back to the shack, kick the cupboard, and hurt my toe. But let the mind beware, though the flesh be bugged, the circumstances of existence are pretty glorious. Thanks for the privilege of speaking here today after 30 years. Many of us are still vertical, so that's good. And I really appreciate it. This is a great turnout this morning. Enjoy the rest of today and enjoy the rest of the weekend. Thank you.